If you said a few years ago that it's better to wait for games from Sony-owned studios to be released on PC than to buy a PS5, you would have laughed in your face. Right now, a number of games from Sony Studios are Steam's bestsellers, and there will be even more in the near future. Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War and Days Gone sold remarkably well and are sold on the PC, but at one time it seemed to me that one console giant still never looked at computers. I'm talking, of course, about Marvel Spider-Man ported on PC by the Dutch studio Nix's Software. But let's take a look and dig deeper in our review before you buy. Let's go! It has been 4 years since the release of this game on the PlayStation 4, but Insomniac has been working hard to improve their brainchild. Since then, the developers have released 3 DLCs, a Game of the Year edition and a remastered port on next-generation consoles. I think that's why Insomniac was considered, in the Sony sense, that the perfect time has finally come to release the PC version of one of the most important PS4 games. Spider-Man Remastered is based on the same game that came out on the curling iron of the previous generation. How, and in the case of the GOTY edition released back in 2019, the PC version includes full set of DLC. All plot moves, side quests, and improvements are in place and have not gone away, but if you expect to see new tasks and other activities, then I hasten to disappoint. There is no such thing in the PC version. Instead, the remastered decided to focus on showcasing the unbridled power of the PC, which should bring an already impressive game to a hitherto unseen level. The plot tells how friendly neighbor Peter tries to combine superhero and everyday life, when the first begins to clearly prevail over the second. As more and more villains appear on the streets of New York, Peter begins not to take out so much pressure. The load that fell on the shoulders of the protagonist is perfectly conveyed through many great cutscenes and memorable landscapes. The PC port can be safely called decent, but called its ideal, the tongue will not turn, and we will talk about this further. The same can be said about the game itself. Spider-Man is a 5-star character in a 3-star world. Peter Parker may be the ideal protagonist, incredibly likable and empathetic, powerful, but not invincible, and his spidery talents push the player to explore every corner of Manhattan. The game relies primarily on the web to keep your attention, and the developers have made an effort to ensure that the player has access to as many ways of movement as possible. It's not as limited to how the game encourages you to max swing, backflip on top of it, and then, when Spidey is about to be smeared on the asphalt, shoot the web again and fly farther. The main character can crawl and run along the walls, translating with absolutely no problems. It's another leap. As soon as you get close to the corner of the building, Spidey will automatically shoot a web to go around it. The same goes for lampposts, just necessary to overcome a sharp turn in the street. There is even a special animation of running on iconic firefighters, the stairs of New York, which manages to amaze me every time with its smoothness. The work that the developers have done over the animations, you can safely call one of the best in the entire industry. But, as already mentioned, there is a huge gap between the game New York and the main character. After amazing prologue at the Kingpin headquarters, you are free to travel wherever you want, and here it becomes more or less obvious that the Insomniacs never learned how to properly fill their open worlds. The vast majority of side missions in the game are a simple chase, collecting backpacks, capturing pigeons, hide and seek with the Black Cat, and so on. Even more action-packed stuff like preventing petty and major crimes, fighting in gangster raspberries, where you fend off waves of opponents, can hardly be called interesting. Spider-Man's biggest flaw, Spider is from a meme, is his inability to effectively use the wonderful list of villains that abound in comics. Spidey probably has the most memorable collection of enemies outside of Batman. True, unlike the games of the Arkham series, in which Batman's adversaries are very effectively woven into the open world, the Spider-Man villains only show up in the last third of the game. Chasing the Shocker at the beginning of the game demonstrates how huge the potential for interaction with the villains, but, alas, it is only revealed towards the end of the game. For the rest of the time, most missions are related to fighting 3 gangs of armed thugs. At first this is not a problem, but if you thought that Arkham Knight abused battles too much, then in Spidey everything is much, much worse. Yes, combat has something to offer you, there are a lot of ways to deal with enemies, but approaching the finale, I just wanted to finish the game, because I was tired of doing the same thing all time. This is true, given that I went through the game on a curling iron, and then played a remaster, so for those who will play the game for the first time, most likely, such questions will not arise. Shortly speaking, Spider-Man's open-world design is a bit of a missed opportunity, but not everything is so bad. Besides, it is worth making an adjustment for your personal preferences and patience. What is there? Just playing as Spider-Man is already a lot of fun in itself. Although Insomniac's attempt to create an interesting open world failed, there is no approach studios to storytelling is simply superb. I sincerely believe that the writers of the game told the story of Spider-Man is better than any of Marvel, taking full advantage of the features of the video game to add proper depth to both the Spider and the secondary characters. Decision to make. A slightly older Peter Parker was a very smart decision for two reasons. Firstly, we get a continuation of his adventures, not just another story about how he got their strength. Secondly, it allows Insomniac to go into more detail about the already more or less settled relationship between characters that we have known for many years. For example, the relationship between Peter and Mary Jane is no longer another teen romance. Thanks to this, we are witnessing wonderful scenes. Highly, it's nice to watch them talk in a New York cafeteria, which, moreover, has a wonderful Stan Lee cameo. The game also neatly ties Spider-Man's origin story to a common plot, starting the relationship between Peter and Miles Morales, setting Spidey Jr. up for his own adventure, which, by the way, will also be presented on PC. But the highlight of the game's character drama is the relationship between Peter and Octavius. The remaster spends a lot of time on the origins of their friendship, but also their mutual intellectual respect and progress. This does not mean at all that Spider-Man is authored Insomniac is a smug character. Spidey is as witty as always during fights, and the script riddled with funny jokes, including those addressed to the police. Surprisingly, the humor associated with law enforcement, not associated with endless scandals in the US, which is nice. But along with this, the game is capable of more serious and calm moments. You sincerely sympathize Peter as he desperately tries to hold the city together while his own life falling apart. Even though the game does a poor job of revealing most of Spidey's enemies, the two villains, which she devotes the most time to, are well developed and are believable antagonists. This is a real story about the friendly neighbor, no matter how you look at it. Great power, great responsibility, and all that. Insomniac's writers show both understanding and admiration for the character, and those of us who are put off by Marvel's modern take on Spidey will appreciate this older, a more experienced version of one of the most famous superheroes. Collect backpacks all over the city. Not very interesting, but they still have small bits of lore detailing the first fights and the general history of Peter Parker. However, the plot is also not without flaws. The second act is too long and the third is too short. Gameplay as Mary Jane helps to develop her character better, but the stealth mechanics work disgustingly, even when you play as Spidey himself. In the case of Mary, everything is much worse. There are no special abilities, any a mistake in a stealth puzzle, start over, and understand how well you are visible to the enemy, almost impossible. Such moments can be safely called the worst in the entire game. But even when the PC remaster is the most annoying, there is still something irresistibly pleasant about it. Spider-Man may not be as comprehensive as Rocksteady's Arkham games, but when you fly cobwebs through Times Square in the sun, while New Yorkers look down at you excitedly, well, that's a superhero high that even Batman himself can't beat. Initially, I was sure that it would be difficult for me to play the Spidey remaster on a keyboard and mouse. It seemed that the battles and flights on the web along the magnificent open space were so closely related to the PlayStation gamepad, which I couldn't imagine how someone could adequately transfer them to traditional PC devices. However, Spider-Man Remastered is not only great as played on keyboard and mouse, but also surpasses the console original in some respects. Flying between the skyscrapers of New York has always been one of the best aspects of the Insomniac game. Now I'm afraid to say that the studio has created one of the best movement systems of the last decades. Spidey's travels in Manhattan are as enjoyable as ever, only now you press and hold shift to start and maintain flight while pressing the spacebar to add some acceleration when moving in a straight line. But it is the mouse support that gives the PC version the biggest advantage. The player can now fly through the narrowest gaps between houses and skyscrapers much more smoothly. Flying on the web should create for the player the feeling that he is an experienced superhero, and the mouse copes with this much better than the gamepad. Combat also, surprisingly, works great on PC peripherals. Basic attacks are bound to LMB, and you can launch enemies into the air by holding it. Almost everything else is tied to keys and within easy reach of the left hand, from web-binding enemies with a quick press of E, to using special abilities like heals and finishing moves with 1-2-3-4. From the console, only the selection wheel with web skills has migrated. It is not only intuitive, but also allows you to slow down the action to think about your next move. Unfortunately, the wheel is tied to pressing the mouse wheel, which is not very convenient. I would say, but Cayman, we are playing on PC, so I very quickly rebinded it to the side mouse button. Granted, the presence of a keyboard and side keys allows you to customize the control for yourself without being tied to the choice of the standard scheme of the gamepad. But despite the almost perfect mouse support with a keyboard, I would still recommend playing with a gamepad. The PC version offers the full support is offered for all controllers that use the Steam API. This system allows buttons to be displayed correctly for all Xbox and DualSense controllers. Last one, honestly, in a word, it fits best, thanks to the nice things carried over from the PS5 version. I say, of course, about adaptive triggers and feedback, but, as is the case with all other games, using these functions, the DualSense needs to be connected to the PC directly, through the wire. Then you can feel the power of each swing on the web or a pleasant knock rain on a gloomy day right through your gamepad. In short, if you have DualSense, then the wiring hassle is worth it. Also, let me remind you, the game is fully adapted for Steam December. Despite the stunning graphics, the remaster has some minor visual issues. The game definitely benefits from unlocked frame rates, and the addition of DLSS allows resolution to be overclocked up to 4K, without losing much in the smoothness of the gameplay and picture quality. The problem lies in ray tracing reflections in numerous puddles and windows, which turned out to be too fuzzy. Rushing through Times Square at breakneck speed, you are witnessing a magnificent spectacle, but once you slow down and pay a little more attention, it becomes obvious that reflections from surfaces, like the body of a car, just don't look right. However, the patch released at the last minute partly solved the problem by improving performance and visual quality ray tracing. It is also worth noting that the patch adds support for 2 more upscaling methods. AMD FSR 2.0, which is still under development, and IGTI, their own solution from Insomniac for scaling. Both, unfortunately, are still far from ideal, and it is worth using them. Just for the sake of experiment, it all depends on your preferences. Talking about how it works. Game, nothing unexpected here. The port works almost perfectly, and there are practically no technical. The game has no problems or troubles with optimization. Another addition is the changes contributed to many game models and textures, including the face of Peter Parker. Although this change caused a lot of controversy before the release, after a personal acquaintance with the game cannot be denied that the new look of the protagonist suits Spidey better than ever. Well, if someone doesn't like it, then they can turn to the modders. Although the events of the game take place several years after how Peter became Spider-Man, the new face seems more natural and appropriate his character. Luckily for those who aren't thrilled about the change, Spiderling stays in mask for most of the game. Either way, the difference between Peter on PS4 and on PC is huge. Speaking of looks, the developers have added 3 new free costumes, from the Amazing Spider-Man films, and 2 created by the Insomniacs themselves. Each of 3 suits is a great little bonus for experienced players who feel right at home among the rest of an already huge lineup of games. Other innovations include several new options in photo mode, such as the ability to change Spider-Man's costume without leaving the menu. A trifle, but nice. Despite the minor shortcomings listed in our review, the fact remains that Spider-Man Remastered is one of the best superhero games on PC. I think that the port of Miles Morales will definitely not be worse, already in order to push sharply for the second time forward the popularity of superheroics. Spidey, in every sense, is at the center of his adventure, while making sarcastic remarks and occasionally showing his heroism, but often his mask filmed to focus on Peter Parker's relationship issues and unpredictability life. Whether you are a fan of comics, movies, or just want to go to the next journey through the new open world, this game is what you need. This game is a real blockbuster, not without the spectacle inherent in any Marvel film, and that she finally got on PC is a real gift for all gamers. And all the comic book haters and those who say that this is bullshit for children, you can pass by. Well, what about the cost? The price tag is approximate $40 or 1,400 hryvnias in Steam and EGS, which, in general, is quite a lot. But if you haven't played before on PS4 or PS5, then I recommend playing it on a PC and only in extreme cases, wait for some discounts. Especially if you have good iron, then you can enjoy very much. Juicy and smooth picture. In any case, this is a very high quality port that is well optimized and seasoned with all DLC and story additions. Therefore, as I said, everyone PC owners, I strongly recommend to pass. Well, the score is 9.0 points out of 10 possible.